Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today we're tackling what seems like a really simple topic, but wow, the sources took us somewhere unexpected. We're looking at the third commandment. You know it. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Now, first thought is probably, okay, don't swear using God's name, right? Don't just toss it around carelessly. But as we dug into the source material, it suggests something much, much bigger. It's less about just the word and more about, well, living in line with these huge, unchanging principles.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The real depth here goes way beyond just pronunciation rules. So our mission really for this deep dive is to get past that surface idea and, unpack the full scope. What did this mean back then? And critically, what does it mean for you today?
Okay, let's start right there then. That common idea, what is the sort of basic everyday understanding of misusing God's name?
Well, historically, you're right. There's a basis for that. Ancient Jews, out of just an immense reverence and, frankly, awe, they consciously avoided saying the name YHWH. They'd say Adonai Lord instead. It was a genuine expression of that fear and respect. So much so, actually, that the original pronunciation, we don't even know it for sure anymore. It was lost.
Right, Adonai. I remember reading about that substitution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the pivot. The commandment, when it talks about misusing or taking in vain, it digs deeper. It's really about any time someone tries to leverage God's name or his perceived authority for their own benefit, or maybe even worse, to deliberately mislead people.
Okay, so it's about the action tied to the name, not just the sound itself.
Precisely. It's the intent and the impact. Are you using that sacred connection authentically or twisting it?
That really opens it up. So can you give us some examples from history? How did this kind of misuse actually happen back then, according to the sources?
Oh, absolutely. The sources point to things like using God's name for divination, trying to tell the future, or using it to curse someone, or even trying to kind of magically get supernatural blessings just for yourself.
Fortune telling, curses. Okay.
Yeah, these were seen as really serious because they warped the whole understanding of who God is and what faith is about.
And what's fascinating there is the thinking behind those practices. What does that tell us about how they saw the world?
Well, those acts, they're rooted in something the sources call deterministic superstition. It's this idea that, your fate, your future, it's all locked in, predetermined. Doesn't matter what you do.
So like destiny, fixed fate, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And that flies directly in the face of the core biblical message, which is much more about your present actions shaping your future. The whole you reap what you sow principle.
Yeah.
That kind of superstition. It can really disempower people, make them feel like their choices don't matter.
Okay, that makes sense. So bringing that forward, how does this connect to us now? Are these kinds of misuses still around?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you still have people seeking out fortune tellers, right? Getting caught up in beliefs that everything is just fated. But the sources we looked at, they point to something potentially even more serious, or at least more subtle. And that's the misuse within religious communities, within institutions themselves.
Inside the church, you mean?
Yeah. Things like people claiming to have prophecies directly from God when they don't, or sermons that twist clear biblical teachings, or even just theological mistakes, errors in understanding that get presented as if they're God's absolute truth. And often, the root of this, the sources argue, is failing to see the Bible as a collection of universal principles. God's laws, basically. Timeless truths.
Not just arbitrary rules or stories.
Right. Instead of seeing these consistent principles, it gets treated as something you can, manipulate for a specific agenda, or maybe something just mysterious and arbitrary.
Can you give a specific example of that kind of distortion, something concrete?
Sure. A really clear one is predicting the exact date of Jesus' return. You see this in certain end-time eschatology circles.
The end of the world predictions.
Exactly. But Jesus himself explicitly said, no one knows the day or the hour, only the Father. So trying to calculate it or claim it's a form of that deterministic thinking, and it directly contradicts the text. Plus, it kind of undermines the whole point of, building God's kingdom now, focusing on our actions today.
Right. It shifts the focus away from present responsibility.
Precisely. And, it's kind of striking that historically a lot of mainstream theology didn't really challenge these things effectively. Sometimes it even seemed to enable or condone them.
That's quite an indictment. And thinking historically, it feels like this opens the door to much bigger issues, too. I mean, haven't truly terrible things been done in God's name.
Oh, absolutely. Horrific things. And the sources don't shy away from this. They point to examples ranging from, say, King David's plundering in his conquests, to say the two, much more significantly in recent history, European Christian nations using God's will as justification for colonialism, for massacres, for stealing cultural artifacts, things still sitting in museums.
Wow. So those are considered violations of this commandment, too.
Directly. They're seen as the tragic results of fundamentally misunderstanding the Bible, getting caught up in what one source calls the devil's deception, even when it's dressed up as, orthodox faith. It's a stark reminder, really, that so many historical tragedies have roots in these basic errors of interpretation. Believing you're serving God while actually working against his core principles.
Okay, let's try and pull this together then. We've got ancient superstitions, modern church errors, even historical atrocities. If they all connect back to misusing God's name or authority, what's the absolute root cause underneath it all?
Well, according to our sources, it really boils down to two key things: profound ignorance and, alongside that, self-delusion. Ignorance and delusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First, ignorance. Just a failure to grasp that the Bible is revealing universal, timeless principles. God's laws. Not just a rule book for one group or a collection of, mystical secrets. And second, delusion. This is where someone genuinely believes they're following God faithfully, but they're operating under a complete misunderstanding of who God is.
And what's the core misunderstanding there?
It's seeing God as, arbitrary, like a human ruler who gives out blessings or punishments based on mood, or maybe favoritism, instead of understanding God as operating through consistent, reliable principles. And sadly, a lot of traditional theology has, sometimes unintentionally, reinforced that image of a somewhat unpredictable, moody God.
So if God isn't arbitrary, not driven by whims, what is the picture the Bible paints when understood correctly?
The picture is of a God of law, a God who operates through clear, unchanging principles. Think of it like physical laws in nature. Gravity always works.
Right. Consistent. Well, the sources argue there are spiritual laws that are just as consistent, just as real. They govern cause and effect in our lives. And the big one, the primary spiritual law that just keeps coming up, it's you reap what you sow.
Reap what you sow. Okay.
Yeah. This isn't some hidden message. It's presented as a core teaching. It's universal. It makes logical sense, and you can literally see it play out in life every day. It's experientially verifiable.
That's actually quite profound in its simplicity. So does that mean real faith isn't necessarily about chasing, mystical visions or waiting for special interventions? Is it more grounded?
That's exactly the insight.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
True faith, according to this understanding, goes beyond just seeking those kinds of experiences. Yeah. It's fundamentally about living in line with that universal common sense principle. You reap what you sow. It's about understanding that your actions have consequences, predictable consequences based on God's laws, and taking responsibility for that.
Living responsibly within those principles.
Exactly. And it's actually quite lamentable, the sources suggest, that so much theology over the centuries has kind of missed this, or even denied this really basic logical core of faith. Genuine faith, then, becomes about living in harmony with God's creation principles, with common sense, with reason. And that kind of life becomes possible when you accept the Bible not as a mystical code, but as these universal truths for everyone.
So wrapping this up, we started with what seemed like a simple rule about not saying a name, and we've ended up seeing it as this incredibly broad command about everything, about not misusing God's authority, about understanding Scripture correctly, about avoiding superstition and delusion. And it's pretty sobering to realize how many terrible things historically happened under that banner of orthodoxy, but were actually rooted in these fundamental misunderstandings.
It really is. And the warnings from the sources are stark. The biggest dangers are that ignorance of God's actual ways and the self-delusion that lets you think you're right when you're fundamentally wrong.
Believing you're righteous while misunderstanding everything.
Precisely. So maybe the call to action for you, for anyone listening, is this. Try reading the Bible again, but look for the universal principles, especially that principle of reaping what you sow. See it not as like secret knowledge, but as God's operating system for reality. And then try to diligently live by that law day in, day out. The sources suggest that's the real path to breaking free from distorted ideas and actually following God's true word.
Living by that principle is the core of faith.
Yes, that's the way out of the confusion.
So, here's a final thought to leave you with. What if the most ordinary common sense principle, we know you reap what you sow, isn't just common sense, but actually holds the deepest key to understanding God's purpose and maybe the truest path of faith for your own life?